What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are here to talk about some potential Detroit Lions news. You guys saw the title, so we're going to be diving into that in today's video, and also a quick little update in some of the salary cap situation for the Detroit Lions as well. So let's get it started.
The Detroit Lions select Jameson Roman.
Welcome everybody to our video. Glad you guys are here. And right now, man, it is draft time. It's draft month. The focus on content over here is going to be on the draft through the draft. So expect that. Got a lot of content planned coming up very soon. That's where the focus is going to be. But I did say if there was Lions news that we would touch on this. And even though it's not like, it is news, but it's not like officially news, because at the same time the guy hasn't actually signed with the Lions. It is something that I thought we should hit on because it is at a position that we talked about multiple times. And it could be like probably the last big move, I should say, that the Lions could make this offseason, but it also gives us an opportunity to update some of the details that we have for the Lions salary cap situation. And again, some of these numbers, we're not sure if they're completely accurate. We do have kind of a lane of what it looks like for the Detroit Lions. So with that, we're going to start there first. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the salary cap side because I'm pretty sure the last free agency video we looked at a lot of that, but I did want to update some of these new contracts that have been reported according to Over the Cap. Now, Spotrac has a couple of different numbers. Some of their details are a little bit different, and that usually happens with these two. I think Spotrac a lot of times can be more accurate with those, but it's not a huge difference, so I'm just going to kind of toss around both here really quickly, and then we'll get into some of this news for the Detroit Lions. So let's start right there. I'm going to show Over the Cap and our current salary cap situation according to Over the Cap. You can see our cap space, $22.9 million. That's a lot of cap space to have at this time, but there's a couple things to keep in mind with this. As always, first thing, this does not include, I'm all over the place. This does not include Marvin Jones Jr. contract. As you can see, he's at the bottom here. Reportedly, he signed a 1-year, $3 to $5 million, maybe incentive-based deal with the Detroit Lions. So that was the initial report. We know it usually comes back different, but that was the initial report. So maybe somewhere in that range his cap number lands, probably closer to the $3 million, I would assume, for this upcoming season. However, we do have now details on a couple of guys here. First one being Nate Sudfeld. Speaking of quarterbacks, Nate Sudfeld, we didn't really have any details on how much he signed for the Detroit Lions, but we knew that he came back on a 1-year deal. I didn't expect it would be a ton, but as you can see, it's a little bit of an upgrade here, right? You can see the cap number is now set at $1.6 million. Spotrac has actually the same numbers. Biggest thing here is probably that he has $1 million dead cap if he was cut, and we're about to talk about a player that could potentially sign as a backup quarterback for the Detroit Lions, and if that is the case, I think there's a very legitimate shot that a guy like this does get cut. Maybe they can keep him around in some way, maybe practice squad, something like that, but it is important to keep in mind that there would be $1 million dead cap with that. That's nothing crazy. We've done it before. Okay, you can do that. It's not like, oh man, we're going to jack up our salary cap if we have to do that. But it is a little bit of a bump from last season, being that it's $1.6 million cap number. And I would assume a lot of this has to do with if you were unable to land a different backup quarterback, because at the time I didn't think Sudfeld would come back. I thought the Lions would go a different route. I just wasn't sure where. The quarterbacks that I liked were signed very early in the process, but a lot of those guys, I could understand why they wouldn't want to sign with the Lions, because you're signing here to be truly a backup, right? You go elsewhere, you may have an opportunity to start. That's really probably not going to be in the cards here. You're more so just coming here to be a backup quarterback. Guy like Jarrett Stidham, who didn't sign a massive deal, a guy that I liked, would maybe say, I wouldn't want to go there, assuming if the Lions would have interest, but I don't know if they had interest in a player like that. But that's just something I think that's worth pointing out. Nate Sudfeld is under contract. If we're not able to sign this player we're about to talk about, I think it does give the Lions a little bit of a security blanket, a guy that they like. The biggest thing that he's lacking is just pure in-game regular season experience. He's had a little bit, but it's been back, but it's not much at all. And recently, we've only seen him in the preseason. We haven't even seen him play in our preseason because we signed him after last year's preseason. But we talked about him more in our last video. The other detail update that we have is on offensive lineman Graham Glasgow. Now, this one differs between Over the Cap and Spotrac. They have two different contract details here. I'll point both of these out. I don't think it's a huge deal, but it's something that's worth at least noting. According to Over the Cap, you can see his cap number set at $2.68 million. Now, originally it was reported that he was signing a 1-year, I believe it was 1 year, $4.5 million is what it was originally reported to be. And as you can see, according to Over the Cap, it gets close to that. The biggest thing here is with a lot of deals we've done something similar is the Lions threw a void void year on his deal. According to Over the Cap, they're saying there's almost a $1.5 million void year, which is the bonus spread across 2 years here that we'll be paying next season, even though he's not going to be on the roster. Again, the reason you do that is to lower the cap number for the current season. So for this year, even though $4.15 million, it's only a $2.68 million cap number. Now that does differ to Spotrac. As you can see, they have a different setup here. Okay, they have a lower signing bonus. Also, the cap number is lower, so the void year is essentially lower as well. And they have a different roster per game bonus setup here. They have a different price tag with $235K versus Over the Cap, who has it set. Here we go, $250K. So theirs is a little bit more straightforward. Spotrac is a little bit more specific in their numbers. So this one, I feel like a lot of times can be more correct. Spotrac can be more accurate with some of these. I don't know which one is. I don't think it's a huge deal. If you wanted to probably bet on which one's probably more accurate, I would guess this one's probably more accurate, which of course in that sense it would throw off kind of all the numbers here by a little bit. But the point is the Lions do have salary cap space. Marvin Jones Jr. will impact this, but there's multiple reasons that you want to have cap space, of course, for the draft. It also gives you flexibility. I don't think that's talked about enough. You know, it changes the price tag of draft picks when you move around the board. Now, some guys won't count towards the top 51 because their cap number won't be high enough to reach into the top 51 at this point in time based on some of the deals we've been giving out. You can see where the top 51 cutoff is according to Over the Cap, $940K. So a lot of draft picks that are later won't have that kind of cap number, so they won't count towards that in the offseason. However, you also got to keep in mind, though, you're moving the board, you're getting higher draft picks. If you trade up, things like that, it's going to affect the cap space. It also gives you flexibility where if someone came after you with a trade option, maybe it was a player, maybe you had to eat some cap space, where you have flexibility to maybe negotiate that because you have some movement that you can make with your numbers. And then finally, on top of that, you have the UDFAs afterwards. It's nice to have cap space. And if this next guy that we're about to talk about does sign, you got to have cap space to sign him. So with all of that being said, PFF projects this player would get a 1-year, $5 million deal. That's what they projected heading into free agency. He has not signed yet, and that is quarterback Teddy Bridgewater. So Teddy Bridgewater has not signed with a team at this time. It has been reported that there is interest from multiple teams. I can read the NFL report according to CBS. Bridgewater, however, is taking his time to make his decision on where he will sign, as apparently he has some options. Multiple teams have shown interest in Bridgewater, including the Detroit Lions, who put forward a contract offer to the quarterback according to ESPN. And according to that report, it is a solid offer that the Lions put out there for Bridgewater. Now, a lot of these quarterbacks have signed with teams, but you have to keep in mind the quarterback situation because it's not as simple as, well, how much money is it, right? Certain quarterbacks like Bridgewater, at his age of 30, he would be signing, Nate Sudfeld's also 30, to be a backup quarterback. Not in the same position of a guy like a Jarrett Stidham that's looking at potentially trying to become a starter. It's a different situation there. So even if his price is higher, it just is because it's also, you have to keep in mind what the quarterback is signing for and what they're, looking for here. A quarterback may take less for an opportunity. He'll be like, hey, it's less money, but I got an opportunity to prove myself here to compete for a starting role. You come to Detroit, you're not really competing for a starting role. You're the backup. That's going to be made clear. That's what you are. And that's great. That's fine. There's not confusion. You know what he is. He helps out the draft pick. If you draft a quarterback, he helps him out. But the situation's very clear. All right. You don't want it to get fuzzy and be like, well, maybe the backup's the guy. Like, you don't want to do that because once you start doing that, everything gets kind of a mess. And then all of a sudden, as soon as something goes wrong, it's like, put that guy in. You don't want to be in that spot. Things are clear. You're the backup quarterback. And when you look at this free agent market, it's harder to find guys that are cool with going into that. But Teddy Bridgewater is one of those quarterbacks, so we've seen this before, that looks like he's going to wait. He could wait till after the draft to see which teams draft who to see, okay, what makes sense for me. But he's waiting a little bit to try to find the right team and what fit that he likes the best. And that could be with the Detroit Lions. I think that's the thing about Teddy Bridgewater. I don't see this being he could compete for the starting job. I don't think that's what this is. But I think the big benefit you have to keep in mind outside of the football side of things is that if you draft a quarterback, as I said, it's probably likely that Sudfeld would probably get cut. But if you drafted a quarterback, he would have someone that he could learn from in Teddy Bridgewater because he wouldn't be getting those reps during the season. He's not getting those practice reps. That's going to the starter in Goff. But he has a guy that he can learn from that actually has played the game, and he's played with multiple systems, and he has tons of NFL experience. That's the one thing that Sudfeld is missing is in-game regular season experience. And I'm sure he can help him. He's been around the league for a while. He's been with some great coaches, but it's different because Bridgewater's played in those games. So that's one thing that he would bring is that draft pick, that new young quarterback that's in there. He would have a guy to specifically sit down and learn from, build good habits. It has direct connections to a guy like Dan Campbell, who overlapped at the same time when Dan Campbell was working with the New Orleans Saints. He started there in 2016. Teddy Bridgewater was there for a few seasons as well with the New Orleans Saints towards the tail end of that. So there is an overlap there. There's a connection there. Now, I started to dive into some of the film here for Teddy Bridgewater just to get a sense on what kind of quarterback the Lions are interested. Of course, if they sign him, we'll end up doing ultimately a bigger breakdown on the player. By the way, I want to point that out. That is something that I've kind of planned here. I thought about tuning out these free agent, profile videos before the draft, but because it's draft month and I really want to focus on that, I'm going to post those after the draft. So in that drought, when there's like nothing happening, I'm going to upload those videos. That way we have content, because there's going to be like nothing happening for like months after the draft. You guys know how that goes in the summer. So I'm going to be putting out my free agent videos then, breaking down the free agents that we signed. I was like, I don't need to cram it all right now, because right now it's all about the draft, but this is news, so I want to talk about it. So reportedly, Lions made an offer here. Now, I think outside of the off-the-field stuff, when you watch him on the field, what are you getting here with Teddy Bridgewater? Well, last season, you see the statistics with the Miami Dolphins. He had 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 683 yards, and I went back and watched the games that he really played in beyond like one snap, and I went back and took a look at those games. There was only one game that he actually started in this past season. He played in Week 6 against the Minnesota Vikings when Tua had a concussion, so he went out. He played against the Cincinnati Bengals when Tua was injured, and then he started against New England Patriots in Week 17, but ultimately he actually got pulled out and they put in Skylar Thompson. So he played in a few games this past season. Now those numbers don't look great, but it's such a small sample size, you really have to watch to see where those things are happening. It's not like all of them are on him, and that's usually never the case. Usually not all on the quarterback. It's usually not all on one guy. But with that being said, for example, like the Minnesota Vikings game, they lost this game by a score, and the first interception that he had in this game was basically just a drop by the receiver on an over route, hit him in the chest, went behind him, picked off. They also had a fumble in this game by Jalen Waddle when they were going in to score. And then his other interception, which happened towards the end of the game, it was an anticipation throw. He got kind of baited, and he threw an interception. And things like that do happen. But I think it's more important to almost look at the previous years in 2021, 2020, and you see the statistics. Specifically, just look at 2021 with the Denver Broncos, where he was basically the guy. 18 touchdowns, 7 picks, over 3,000 yards passing, basically a 95 pass rating. 2020, you look at that season as well, Carolina, 15 touchdowns, 11 picks, 3,700 yards, and basically a 92 passer rating. So he's not like a big time, put up big types of numbers. That's not the type of quarterback that he is. But usually from your backup quarterback, like I said, this isn't a guy that's like, man, he's the future. That's not what you're looking at here. You're looking at a guy that can get you through games that you're confident in. And the thing that I was honestly most impressed with him as a player is just thinking about the sense of him being able to step into games while also keeping the playbook so open as he does, right? He has his own play style and the way that he plays the game. But the fact that he's able to step into a game and everything doesn't just go to either him throwing flats or just like running quarterback draws is pretty impressive, because he was able to keep the playbook open. He was able to push the ball down the field on third downs, give you chances to try to pick up big plays, move the football consistently, read the entire field. Like, everything didn't get super, super dumbed down every time he had to step in. And I think that's a difficult challenge for a backup quarterback. Like, that's what a lot of backup quarterbacks do. And I think it's like what Ben Johnson said. He's like, we can hide, some of the other stuff with just early play action. But what guys can step in and basically pick up a third down for us? What guys can do that, especially as a backup quarterback? That's where it gets difficult to find, because they're not getting those reps, right? They're stepping in. And I think one thing that you love about Teddy Bridgewater is the fact that he's been in so many different systems, and he's been able to play that role of a guy that can just step in and step up. But at the same time, I think 2021 is so important to look at, because when he was basically the guy that season, I thought he looked much better in some of those big time situations, because his game is a lot about timing. And that's where an issue can come in for him, because when your game's so much about timing, right? You don't have the biggest arm, the most velocity into the second or third level, and everything is kind of anticipation and timing and rhythm. When that's the case, that can have issues in terms of when you're put into the game and you weren't expected to play and you weren't getting those reps. And especially if it's your first year there and it's early in the season, you're stepping in and your timing is off and you're expecting some guy to be here and you're throwing it somewhere else. That's where you saw some mistakes as well. Like there was an interception that he threw to Gesicki where he threw it, but it was like Gesicki was just running up the seam. The guy didn't even look for the football. There was a clear miscommunication there, and he threw it right to the defender. But when I went back and looked at 2021, of course, the first game I had to look at was when he played the Lions. He played a pretty good game, and all of a sudden, as I'm charting his third downs and fourth downs and the conversion rates and what he's doing on those downs, the rate at which he's converting these is going way up. it's going way up. And I think that's a lot of it, the timing, because so much of it is about timing as a quarterback. And all of a sudden, when that's locked in, he looks like a much better quarterback, and he's a much more reliable quarterback. But the fact that he's been able to bounce around from different systems, step in, I think what he's giving you in terms of helping the young guy is huge, but also at the same time, you have confidence that you're not going to have to dial back everything and be like, all right, the backup's in the game, we got 3 plays, and we'll run a couple draws. Like, that can't happen. And I think for him, he allows you to keep things open. And he doesn't throw. I didn't see a lot of just dumb decisions where you're just throwing it to defenders. Like, you get a lot of college quarterbacks where you'll get kind of those lulls of, like, some passes are just, it's like, why did he throw that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. You're playing fine, and then it's just like a terrible decision. A lot of his interceptions didn't seem to come that way. A lot of them came through sometimes misplacement, or also a lot of times anticipation getting him into trouble. I think this was a perfect example as the interception against the Vikings, where this is one thing that you like about him, and you liked it when he came out of Louisville. He's a very quick processor. Like, he recognizes coverage breakdowns, but he's a very quick processor to feel what the defense is kind of dropping into. Now, with that being said, you also have to point out the fact that he can be thrown off. I think there was a great example where he almost threw an interception, and again, this doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but it almost happened. He nearly threw an interception where he was getting a cover 0 look pre-snap. I think that's what it was, top of my head. And then they dropped out of it, and you can see the way that he reacts as if they were bringing everybody, and they clearly were not bringing everybody. But he was dropping back as if they were, and he just threw it up, and they had no chance at all. So that was one of those situations where they fooled him with a pre-snap look. I think in terms of, as a rhythmic passer, his ability to find that kind of groove, sit into that groove, be a high completion percentage, high percentage passer, in terms of giving your guys a chance. Like, I looked at that Denver Lions game, all right, I think he was 18 for 25. There was like 4 easy drops in that game that I noted from his receivers. So that completion percentage could have been much higher. That's the range you'd like to keep him in, is like the 25 passes. You wouldn't want it going, much further beyond that. But I think the thing that stands out is his ability to play with anticipation and his ability to process very quickly on the fly. That is huge for a backup quarterback, to pick up on who's open, getting through my reads, full field reads as a backup quarterback that just steps in. He's able to get through the entire field. Things like that are huge, and I'm sure you always have to pull it back a little bit, but the fact that he's able to do that is massive. Anticipation throws in zone holes between the numbers, and that's something that a lot of quarterbacks coming out of the draft struggle with, is finding those plays. Either if it's an over middle pass, it's usually a man beater. He's just running a drag or a crosser. But for him, his ability to find those holes with anticipation against a zone over the middle of the field is something that is big time. It's a big time part of his game, and that's because how fast he processes, in the sense that he has, okay, the cornerback's leaking out here, so that means that high-low is going to be open. Those kind of little things that he has a really good sense of. When there's a blitz, okay, who is he matched up on? I got it. Is this man? Is this zone? For the most part, he's a pretty quick processor, especially for a backup quarterback. Arm strength, there is a clear lack of velocity here. Typically, it shows up from the second and third levels. 15-yard, 20-yard out routes, like you'll see that comeback route. You'll see the lack of velocity show up in his game, and all that means for him is that he has to lean more on anticipation rather than being able to more so see it and put it out there. Even if the race route is open, when he gets into his drop back, where he was in a pro style offense coming out, where he gets into his drop back 5-step drop, all of a sudden it's a 30-yard pass to the sideline. He can't see that pass and then still throw it versus a cornerback, because they can undercut those. He has to put that out before he even sees the break and kind of leave it up there. And there's a little bit of a loft to it where he's kind of dropping it into the placement. But for the most part, I thought he had good ball placement, good accuracy at those levels. It's just that he has to throw with anticipation, which can lead to some interceptions, because you can get baited if you're having to throw with anticipation. That's just part of his game, which means that a lot of times when you go to the underneath routes, you get a lot more consistency there, because that doesn't show up as much within his game. It's not really a problem within his game. Let's get off-script creativity, and this showed up a lot, specifically this past season with Miami when they got into the red zone. Again, you're not getting those reps, so timing's not always ideal, and red zone is so tight windows that I think that shows up. But he does have ability to create off schedule, and a lot of the plays and conversions in the red zone came off schedule for Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, there were a couple of like hole hitters he had, but for the most part, a lot of stuff was off schedule, scrambling around, doing something creative, off script. That was the case usually. What I liked is he didn't throw the ball into trouble just because he was outside of the pocket. He kept his eyes downfield, but he wasn't just throwing it right to the defense. He was still throwing with anticipation, trying to put balls away from the defender. But that's where the creativity and the athleticism did show up the most to me, was in the red zone. I think that's always been a thing for him, even going back to when he was with the Vikings. Like, I feel like his ability to create off schedule in the red zone is always a big part of his game, because it's below average velocity that he gets on the football, and at the same time, it's tight windows. So when your timing isn't perfect, you really, it makes it difficult in that small of field to force the ball in the little holes. So all of a sudden, that's where the legs come into play. But that's going to be the case with every backup if you think about it, right? Every backup is not going to get those reps. So if I have to throw you into that moment, either you have to find a way to be really good with your timing and just trust it, which is going to be difficult to do, or you got to find some way to get into the end zone. For him, he can lean on his leg. He's not the most elusive, you know, when you watch him, especially in the pocket. Like, he's not the most crafty in terms of just sliding in the pocket, moving the pocket while also keeping his eyes downfield. A lot of time when he breaks the pocket, he's breaking the pocket to reset outside. He's not necessarily just fluidly stepping up, sliding, moving, and these kind of things, but he does have pocket awareness. You get some pocket awareness there in terms of where pressure is coming from and how to get away from it. He does take a pretty good amount of sacks, but I think the big thing about that is that, first off, Miami's O-line at times had some problems, but also the poise. He's willing to stand in and deliver on third down and put some passes out there, and that was a big thing coming out, is that he consistently converted big third downs. And again, I think that's where his legs start to come into play a ton, is because he's going to be able to lean on those. To his accuracy, he does have that touch on his passes. He has the ability to lead receivers. He doesn't have a huge arm, but he can lead receivers and drop them a little bit better in a bucket. I won't say names because we're going to have profiles on the draft thing, but certain guys coming out of his draft that when they throw a third level pass, it is a bullet every time, and it's just they're not dropping it onto any receiver. There's no fluidity there. It's not leading anybody. He has that ability to flow and lead receivers into those types of throws. You're going to get issues with it. You definitely will, and there's limitations within his game, but I think the ability to process and step in was the thing that I was most impressed about, and you can honestly see from every statistic across the board, his season statistics, but also just look at his on-target percentage. 2022, it was 74.7%. All of a sudden, you go back to where he's a guy. 2021, it's 77.8%. 2020, it's 80.5% on target percentage. You notice the third down conversion rates improve when he's on the field more consistently because he has a sense for the offense. And we play a timing offense. I think he would immediately be able to step in and handle all the play action responsibilities with ease. Coverage, field openings, and coverage. I think it's a big part of his game, and that's the thing that I think I like most. And then again, it'd be great for a draft quarterback to have a guy with this experience where he doesn't necessarily have to be out there to help the young guy. He can just be like, hey, I did this. I was in that situation. I worked with this guy. I've been with all these coaches. This is what I've learned, and it'd be a great thing for a young quarterback that's going to spend most of his time with the guy that's also not getting reps. Back to the arm velocity, that's where it can limit him a little bit, is trying to fit in those tight windows, whether it's man coverage or zone coverage. Zone coverage is a little bit easier because there's more space. He knows where the space is, and that's where he thrives. You saw games where teams would back off in coverage because it was like a 2-minute drill. He would dink and dunk you down the field. He's a dink and dunk type of quarterback. I would put him into that category. He's what they say, dink and dunk Tom Brady. He's a dink and dunk type of quarterback for sure. That's where he's most comfortable. That's where he's at his best. Processing, getting the ball away, finding his check downs, hitting the underneath things. But when it starts to come to man coverage, you're going to have some limitations in terms of trying to squeeze the ball into tight windows. Everything then has to become anticipation. The further it gets down the field, the more anticipation he has to throw with. So that's where you start to get some problems. So he thrives underneath. Things get a little bit shaky as they get a little bit deeper down the field, but his ability to step in with comfortability is better than I think a lot of backups. Bridgewater, we'll see if he signs here. He does feel like one of the quarterbacks that are available that actually fall into the category that makes a lot of sense. And I think Brad Holmes even made that clear. If I remember at the owners meeting, right, he said there was only like 3 or 4 quarterbacks that they were actually like interested in bringing in, because I think there's only so many quarterbacks that are interested in also coming in for that same role, while at the same time understanding like, hey, you're the backup quarterback. This is your job. This is what you are here. This isn't like you might compete for the starting. You're the backup quarterback. You can help a young guy if we bring him in. That's your role, but also not just a backup in the sense that he's a backup, a guy that you can trust that can actually get you through games. And Bridgewater's probably one of the higher ones on that list, just because there's not a lot of guys that fall into that category, right? There might be other guys that I would have preferred over Bridgewater, but I don't know if those other guys would have preferred the Lions. Bridgewater's strengths as a quarterback being processing the field, ability to get through full field reads, sense pressure, find his checkdowns, recognize when there's openings in coverage, but also at the same time consistency in his footwork, his technique within the pocket, and then being able to reset himself outside the pocket to still maintain, adequate accuracy. I think for a lot of young quarterbacks where sometimes you're drafting tools and traits, I think that's really good to have a mentor like that potentially in a guy like Bridgewater, because what he does well isn't just leaning on athleticism. That can help a young quarterback that maybe has some of those tools but needs to development and growth in those areas for the NFL. You have to be able to play on time, play on schedule, be someone that you can rely on consistently, and I think it's tough to find that, right? Bridgewater may not be the most dynamic backup quarterback out there, but his tools will allow him, in my opinion, to groom a young quarterback better than most backup quarterbacks can. That's just kind of my thoughts on the situation, if that makes sense. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.